Gaze reading where the greats drop by. Trendy authors tell us all the who, what, and why. Anyone can listen, cause we're spoiler free. Gaze reading, from Pulitzer stars to book club picks, where the curious minds can get their fix. So you say you're not gay, well that's okay. There's something for everyone. Gaze reading.
Hello and welcome to Gaze Reading. I'm your host, Jason Blitman, and on today's episode, I have S.A. Cosby talking to me about his book, King of Ashes, and my guest gay reader is author and theater producer, Richie Jackson. Both of their bios are in the show notes. Thank you so much for being here. If you are new to Gaze Reading, welcome. And if you're coming back to join again, welcome back. So happy to have you as always. In case you missed it, the Gaze Reading Book Club is officially here. I have teamed up with Alstora to bring you curated queer reads for just $1 to start. We're kicking off in July with Disappoint Me by Nicola Dinan, who was a guest gay reader last week. Each month, I'll be hand-picking LGBTQIA+ authors whose work hits that literary but approachable sweet spot. And the beautiful part is that for every membership, Alstora will donate a book to an LGBTQ+ young person. The link is in the show notes, and there's a special Pride deal going on where you can get your first month's box for $1. And then after that, every month you'll get a book delivered to your door that is curated by yours truly. There will be a group chat and author conversations and so much going on. You don't want to miss it. So head to the link in the show notes or in the link tree on Instagram. Make sure you're following us on Instagram, which is at Gaze Reading. There's a giveaway happening right now. There's another giveaway happening next week. You could also find us over on YouTube and Substack. So much happening on the Substack and Blue Sky. The links to all the things are in the show notes, including for Gaze Reading merch, and it's Pride. So of course that means it is the time to buy your gay reader mug. Who doesn't need a gay reader mug? And Pride season is also the perfect time to boost queer voices. Following Gaze Reading on all of your podcast platforms of choice means that you will never miss an episode, and it tells the platforms that LGBTQ+ stories deserve space. And those star ratings are pure gold for visibility. So do with that as you will. And without further ado, please enjoy my conversations with S.A. Cosby and Richie Jackson. You feeling good? How you doing?
Yeah, I'm good. Everything's ramping up for my new book, so I'm sort of in a holding pattern, but also sort of on the runway, metaphorically speaking, ready to go. So, but yeah, we're doing good. It's a new book, and so of course, as a writer, you're nervous. You want people to like it. You hope people like it. My new book is very dark. It is extremely dark, and that's saying something because my last book was about a child killer. So, but I have been pleasantly surprised at some of the early reactions. I got my first trade review for Library Journal the other day. They liked it. The readers seem to like it. It is, like I said, extremely dark, but also I think it has a lot of heart, like a lot of my books. So,
Yeah. I feel like I was warned based on other podcasts that you've been on that Flipper the cat might make an appearance. So I'm fingers crossed over here.
So Flipper is I have put him in a room. So he's protesting that, but he is he loves to make an appearance. He likes to come on and make his presence felt. He wants to
listen. As long as you said Flippers, as long as you didn't say Flippers no longer with us, because then I would have had to put my foot in my mouth.
Oh no. He's still with us. He's an indoor cat, and he's living the life of Riley, so he's doing fine.
When this episode comes out, this is coming out on a Thursday. The Tuesday, I'm in conversation with V.E. Schwab. She and I had this conversation. I can't remember if it was Blacktop Wasteland or something. You talked about when you give someone a nickname, it makes them a myth, and a myth never dies. And I'm obsessed that you go by your initials. You've essentially you've created a myth of yourself. Do you feel that way?
Well, the funny thing about the story, no, the story behind the initials. But I don't take myself that seriously, I don't. The story behind the initials was, so I grew up in the South, and in the South, most of the time we used to buy, when you could buy books when I had money, which I didn't often have money as a kid, but when you had money, they would have a row of books in the supermarket, right? So you go into the local Southern supermarket chain, and you would always see books in the supermarket, and they were always behind a shelf. So you could only see the top half of the book, right? So a part of the title, but if it was a big author, their name was at the top of the book, right? And so, you go through and you see Dennis Lehane, you see Walter Mosley, you see, J.D. Robb, and, all these folks. I always thought, I said, it would be cool to have like my name at the top of a book with my initials. I think it would stand out more. So when I started writing, I said, well, I'll just write under S.A. Cosby, And I think some people think like, oh, is that a play on words? Like essay, it's like an essay. And I was like, I wish I was that clever. I'm not. I just thought it was my
Nope,
initials.
you just wanted your name on the top of the book. Right.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
Oh,
it wasn't my metaphorical sort of sense. So yeah, but that, my name is Sean. You call me Sean. It's fine.
Right.
I do think that though. I think when people, nicknames and stories and sort of apocryphal incidents create legends, they create myths. And so I definitely believe that. I mean, I think everybody knows somebody who had a nickname that they got because they did something crazy, and those stories live on, regardless of whether you're from the South, from the Northeast, from the West, you always have somebody in your life that, that is like, wow, remember that night, remember that night, Cosmo guy, he drank those 27 Cosmopolitans and was able to walk upright. That's a story that lives on even, and so.
If you didn't get one of those nicknames, what would your nickname have been?
When I was a kid, my nickname was Books. Everybody just called me Books. I used to have a backpack, and I just had it full of paperback. Yeah, and I would just walk around with a backpack full of paperbacks and comics and stuff. I read all the time. I still am a pretty voracious reader. I had a cousin whose nickname was the Maul, M-A-U-L, because he punched the guy one time so hard that the hospital thought he had been attacked with a hammer. And that nickname stuck. That was his name for the rest of his life. So
oh my God. That's nuts. I'm also obsessed that your nickname was Books. That's so cute. Can I call you that? Can I call you Books?
You can call me Books if you want, yeah.
Sean, S.A. Cosby, Books. Welcome to Gays Reading. We're starting with a bang. I'm obsessed. Okay, so I finished King of Ashes, which I want to talk about in a minute, but then I went right to Blacktop Wasteland because King of Ashes was my first S.A. Cosby. And I needed more right away. So I started Blacktop Wasteland. I'm about halfway through. What is it with you and hamburger casseroles? They're
in every book. So when I was a kid, like I said, we grew up really, really poor. And my mother was disabled, so she had spinal stenosis. So she couldn't physically cook, but she taught us how to cook. And she taught us really simple dishes because me and my brother were kids. And so one of my favorite things that she taught me how to cook was hamburger casserole. And there was so many variations because when you're poor, you learn to be flexible with food choices. And so there's so many variations on hamburger casserole. And I, in sort of a family Easter egg. So my family members read the book, they'd see the hamburger casserole, and sort of a shout out to my mom. She's no longer with us. So little family trivia there. So, but I also hamburger casserole is good, Yeah.
I'm sure it is. Well, I was like back to back in these books. I was like, now I want hamburger casserole. Do you still make that? What's your go-to ingredients?
Oh yeah. So I use regular ground beef hamburger. I use I don't want to give a company name, but I use tomato sauce. I use a very specific tomato sauce. I chop up onions and green peppers. And then what I do is I top it with shredded cheese. And then I put it in a pan that's lined with instant biscuits, right? So you line the pan with biscuits. And what happens is, as the biscuits expand, as they cook, they sort of come over the beef. So you have this sort of oven-baked casserole cheeseburger. So, and that's delicious.
Interesting. Okay, have you ever tried putting like French fries on top?
I've heard of that, but I haven't done it. But I was in Syracuse a couple months ago and went out to eat, and that is like a staple. Well, Syracuse is the only place I've been to where your side dish, if you get a main dish as beef, is more beef. So, so you get a cheeseburger, and
the heart disease capital of the world.
Must be, because you get a cheeseburger in Syracuse, your side dish is these two little sausages, and I'm like, what? Where are the French fries? Oh, you got to ask for those. So, but I saw a restaurant that had the hamburger casserole with the French fries on top as an entree. So hey, I didn't try it because I'd already eaten something, but I was very curious about it.
Well, when you said you lined the casserole dish, I thought you were going to say with fries. So that's why I was like, oh, maybe if you do the fries on top, then you get the carbs on the top and on the bottom. Now my mouth is watering. Okay. King of Ashes. Do you have an elevator pitch for the book yet? Tell the people, what is the book about?
Yeah. So King of Ashes is the story of the Carruthers family, older brother Roman, middle sister Nevaeh, baby brother Dante. Their family owns a crematory, but as the book begins, Roman is living a very fascinating, hedonistic life in Atlanta, Georgia as a financial advisor. Gets a phone call from his sister that their father, Keith, has been in a car accident. When he gets home, he finds out that it wasn't an accident, that his brother Dante is in debt to very dangerous criminals. And so in an effort to assist his brother out of this terrible situation, he ends up working for these criminals to try to pay off the debt that his brother owes. Also, meanwhile, their sister Nevaeh, who has been holding the family business together, trying to hold the family together, decides this is the time to investigate the disappearance of their mother, who disappeared when they were all teenagers. And everybody in this small little Virginia town thinks their father killed her because she was having an affair. And so King of Ashes is the story of this family and how they deal with both past and present traumas.
Are you the oldest?
I'm the baby. I have an older brother, so I'm the baby.
You're the baby.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay, because there's very much I'm the oldest, and so I felt like I related very much to Roman. I was like, oh, there is firstbornness deeply rooted. So you clearly wrote it as the observer of the firstborn.
Well, I will say this, and I hope my brother doesn't get mad. I'm the baby, but I very much acted like the oldest. So, yeah, I was.
Listen, I hear lots of stories about that.
Yeah, I talk about King of Ashes is about sort of the titles or the jobs that were given in our family. I was given the job of the responsible one, even though I was the baby, and so I definitely identify with Roman in many ways, and I love my brother, I do. But, it was definitely, I understood Roman. I understood the weight of that responsibility and also sort of that millstone that sometimes feels like it's around your neck.
So Roman is living in Atlanta, as you were saying. He goes home when he finds out his dad was in an accident, but it's referred to later as not home anymore, just the place that his family lives. When do you think that change happens? When does that place no longer become home?
I think if you move away, and I've moved away and come back a couple times from my hometown, but I think when you move away, when you finally establish like your circle of friends and comrades and colleagues, when you find that sort of, I don't want to say, when you find that sort of, ersatz family, that's when you've created a new home, and, like Thomas Wolfe said, you can't go home again because you're not the same person you were when you left. You've changed. That person, the identity, that person that people think you were doesn't exist anymore. And so you go home, you have to deal with those sort of expectations that aren't viable into who you are now, And I think a lot of people feel that. Even though I've moved away and I currently live where I grew up, I definitely know I'm a different person than I was before I left.
Interesting. What was it like coming back?
It was, a little bit embarrassing because I moved away and I basically, Cliff Notes version, I dropped out of college. I had to help my mom with some stuff. And then once that sort of eased up, I decided to leave and I went out west. And when I came back, I did feel sort of like a little bit of a failure. I had come home. I had gone away to the quote unquote big city. And I felt like it wasn't that I couldn't cut it. Certain things happened where I had to come home. I didn't have a place to stay. The people I was staying with were a couple and they broke up. So, she kicked all of us out. And so I sort of felt a little bit like a failure. But then, I realized that, it wasn't the end of the world. And I started writing more seriously when I came back. And it's funny, I've had the opportunity now to travel literally around the world. And so I don't feel like I'm stuck at home. I don't feel like, I had to come back with my tail between my legs. Home is just a place where I lay my head, but I've been able to travel the world, travel the country. And so I'm very blessed, very lucky to be able to do that. So I have a different sort of perspective on it than I did when I first came back.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like you sort of came back one person and then transformed even more so. And now you can appreciate it in a new way, which is super cool.
Oh yeah, definitely. Definitely. It's funny though. Home is interesting because when I wrote Razorblade Tears, right. And I wrote that for my cousin. I have a cousin and who's gay. And I wrote it. He inspired it. And so I remember him, I sent him the early copy of it. And he's like, man, this is really good. But he was, what do the people back home think? I was like, I don't give a fuck. Like, it's like, I don't judge myself by the expectations of the people that knew me when I was a kid, because I'm not that person anymore. I love my hometown. I love people here, but you cannot live as an artist in the shadow of people that knew you when. Joe Lansdale says you have to write like everybody who you might think would be embarrassed by your work is dead. You have to write in a way that tells the truth, and like Titus says, and all the sinners bleed, the truth is always in season. So,
yeah. Well, interesting that your cousin clearly was still connected and concerned about what people back home would think or feel, whatever back home even meant to him.
It's funny because he lives in Atlanta, and he left, early on and created a wonderful life for himself down there. And I guess why, since I mentioned it, I'll give you the backstory to Razorblade. So and this will kind of answer your question. So Razorblade was inspired by my cousin. He came home. We used to have a big family reunion, and he was living in Atlanta, and he would bring his partner home with him. And at first, he would not acknowledge that was his partner. He was his roommate or whatever. And one day he called me. He said, "Hey, are you going to be at the reunion this year?" And this was before I was a writer. This was before I was published. And I was like, "Yeah, I'll be there." He said, "Well, I'm going to tell mom and dad, who were my aunt and uncle. I'm going to tell them that me and my partner are together, and he was like, and I really could use the support. I was like, yeah, I'll be there, sure. So we go to the reunion, and he introduces his partner as his boyfriend, and it did not go well. And so later on, me and my brother took him out for a drink. We went out to a bar, and he said two things that stuck with me years later when I decided to write this book. The first thing he said was, man, maybe I should have kept it to myself. And that broke my heart, Like, I could not imagine what it was like to know the people that are supposed to love you unconditionally don't, And I say that as a kid who was a wild kid who put a lot of gray hairs in my mom's head, but I never felt like, no matter what trouble I got into, that she, but I never felt like she didn't love me, I never felt that way. And the second thing he said was, I hope that they, can come around to understanding that I'm happy before it's too late. Those two things stuck in my head, And then my brother, who is not always the most sensitive person in the world, he turns to my cousin and he says, "So you and your guy, y'all gay together? Y'all gay for each other?" And then he was like, "Yeah." And my brother takes a sip from his beer and he says, "So he makes you happy though, right?" And my cousin like, "Yeah, he makes me very happy." My brother's like, "Well, fuck it. Y'all be gay, man. Be happy. Don't worry about our aunt and uncle. Go back to Atlanta. Live your life." And I remember thinking, yeah, hell yeah. And so when I went to write Razorblade, it was a book inspired by that idea that love is love, and you should be happy that someone loves your child or loves your brother or loves your sister or loves this person that identifies as non-binary. And that you should be happy that they have someone in their life. And so that's sort of where the idea from the book came from. So when we were talking about it later and he said that, I said, "Why are you worried about people back home?" And he says, I don't know. He says, because it's home, and I want to maybe one day come back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Trauma is real.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely.
And, among the things I wanted to talk to you about today, because this episode and this book coming out during Pride, what it means for you to be an ally. And I think you just really, you just told such a beautiful story of a great example of allyship. And I think, we all need that cousin, that friend, that whoever who's going to stand there and say, I'll be there for you. I got your back. And I'm going to love you no matter what. So so who cares about what the people around you are going to say? So on all of our behalfs, thanks for being a good ally.
Well, it's funny. I try to, there are people, and I'm sure you've experienced this, that try to take allyship as this sort of badge of on, like I'm an ally, and it's like an ally is not saying it. You know what I mean? An ally is, walking into a bar with a friend who's gay or trans or non-binary or, Black or Hispanic or from a marginalized group, is walking with that person and letting them know that they're safe, let them know that, hey, I'm with you. No matter what goes down here, we're going to be together. It's not just buying, and I mean this with all due respect, it's not just buying a rainbow t-shirt and wearing it. It's knowing that when the shit hits the fan, we're together with this, and, I remember when Razorblade came out, and I got a lot of notoriety for it, but, I felt like I made a post online. I said, hey, I appreciate all the support for Razorblade, but here, read these gay authors who are living this, read Michael Nava, read Greg Aaron, read Margaret Duele, read these folks that are really living this. I'm just a straight guy trying to talk about what it feels like to grow up in a community that is steeped in homophobia, but these people are living this. So don't put me on a pedestal, I appreciate you buying the books. I appreciate you enjoying it, but go read these writers so you can understand what it's like to live this, not just a straight guy observing it. I think for me, that was really important. I did not want Razorblade or me to put on any kind of pedestal for that, and so that I think also is being a good ally, is centering the people who need to be centered, in my opinion.
Sean, you're so cool. Yes, thank you.
I mean, I had
come on, books. Come on.
I had a good raising. I had a good mom. My mom. When I was a kid, I grew up around a lot of readers, right? And so my mom read everything. She was not a fiction reader, but she read James Baldwin, and she read, Gore Vidal, and she read Anais Nin and all these folks, and she read Greek mythology and stuff. And, she really drilled into my brother and I in our heads that, you treat people the way you want to be treated. You meet people where they are, and, it doesn't matter who they love or who they care about, as long as they're good to you. If somebody's good to you, you be good to them. So, that a lot of that credit goes to my mom, because I also was raised in a hyper masculine environment. I had a lot of uncles, and, they were tough guys, man. They were blue collar guys that worked, jobs, putting asphalt down on the roads or working at sawmills. And there was this sort of sense of, you have to maintain and protect your masculinity. Somebody bumps into you, you got to fight them. If I disrespect you, you got to fight them. I'll tell you a funny story, which in hindsight probably isn't that funny, but when I was 12 years old, I used to ride the school bus, and this kid was stealing my lunch. It was an older kid. And I would come home, and one day my uncle, because we lived around my family. We had like a family compound, sort of. And my uncle was like, man, why are you always hungry when you get off school bus? Why are you always hungry? You're so hungry. Because I'd wolf my food up for dinner, I said, well, there's this kid that steals my lunch. And my uncle, who thought he was doing good by me, he said, look, you come off the school bus tomorrow and that kid stole your lunch, I'm going to punch you in your chest. You're going to fight me. And I'm like, yeah, right. Okay, whatever. I'm not fighting this 35-year-old man. I'm 12. Got off school bus, came down the lane. My uncle's like, where's your lunch? I said, that kid took it. Punched me in my chest hard enough to stop my heart. He said, every day you get off the school bus that you haven't fought this kid and protected your lunch, you're going to fight me. So the next day I'm on the school bus, and the guy comes up, and he's like, you know what time it is? I was like, nope, we fighting today. I'll fight you rather than this grown ass man that has paws like a bear trap. And for a long time, it took me a long time to realize that was my uncle in the only way he knew how, trying to communicate to me to stand up for myself. And that is a very toxic way of communicating it. That is a very toxic masculine way, but it's also tragic because he didn't have the tools to say it any other way. And so when I grew up, I tried to do a lot of work to unlearn that, to unlearn that sort of idea that, that violence is the only way to establish your masculinity. I learned that, my definition of masculinity is not affected by yours or hers or his or anyone else's. And so, I definitely worked through my writing, through my creativity to understand that, but I grew up like that. I grew up behind a bar, I had my first bar fight when I was 16. I don't know if you can see it, but my knuckles, these last two knuckles are flat. Guy broke a pool stick over my hand when I was like 18. And I don't say that to brag. I say that to say that was the environment that I was sort of steeped in. But also it gave me a lot of sympathy for the men in my life, because being African-American men in the South, where you are constantly disrespected, where you're constantly discounted, where your manhood and masculinity and your adulthood is, if not questioned, dismissed. That sort of physicality, in many ways, they felt like that's the only way I can establish myself. That's the only way I can define myself.
Yeah.
And so it gives me a lot of empathy for them,
Well, and the way that you just described it, you said, that behavior was almost tragic. And it's so interesting bringing it back to King of Ashes. There's a quote about how he thought about the power of tragedies. And the book itself is so Shakespearean. What do you think? What is the power of tragedy to you? What does that mean to you?
The power of tragedy is the idea or the concept that pain is universal, that we all feel pain. Pain is the language that we all speak, right? Pain is the first thing you learn as a baby. It's not love. The first thing you remember is the time you touched the hot stove, or the time you cut yourself on a knife, or the time a dog chased you. Pain and fear is this sort of uniformity that we all understand. And the beauty of that, the beauty of a tragedy is we learn that we can survive it. We learn that we can make it through, that we can have a tragic, horrific thing happen and still the sun is going to rise, the world's going to turn. And I think the great writers, and I'm not putting myself on that pedestal, the great writers, the great artists are able to translate that and articulate that in a way that really sits with you. You mentioned Shakespeare. I'm a huge Shakespeare nerd. I've been to Shakespeare's birthplace in Stratford upon Avon. My favorite Shakespeare play is King Lear. And King Lear is a tragedy. It's a tragedy steeped in love and what the toxicity of love can be and can do. And so when I wrote King of Ashes, I wanted to articulate that idea that love is wonderful, but toxic love, tragic love, it can destroy you. It can break you. And I wanted to show that these characters, some of them survive and some of them don't. And I wanted to talk about that.
Yeah. It's so amazing and not surprising to hear that you're such a big Shakespeare fan. Where did that come from for you?
My 10th grade English teacher assigned us Julius Caesar, and she had a really interesting assignment. She had us rewrite the ending the way we thought it would go. And I remember rewriting it, and I read the play backwards and forwards. I watched the Marlon Brando production. I just was so taken with the idea that, this is Elizabethan English and this is, the Globe Theater, but these are themes and ideas that I understand and resonated with me. And once I read Julius Caesar, I read Romeo and Juliet. I went, I just fell in love with the whole Shakespearean canon. And something that I learned is that while Shakespeare is great art, Shakespeare is also genre fiction. Shakespeare is crime. Shakespeare is violence. Shakespeare, he was writing for the masses. He just happened to be a genius. And so I think for me, it really spoke to me that I could write crime fiction. I could write horror fiction. I could write genre fiction, but still have literary aspirations. And I think that does still come through in my work. So.
Yeah, that was very, very clear. And now I just want to read the S.A. Cosby adaptation of Julius Caesar. That I want to, I
Well,
want to, I want to, I want to see that on a stage somewhere. I want you to write a play.
well, that was me in
Have you
10th
ever thought
grade.
about that?
I have thought about writing a play, but I got to warn you, that was me in 10th grade. So that the new ending was a bunch of knife fights and baseball bats. So
Well, you've leveled up a little bit from then, I'm sure. A woman who Roman dated once said that she used to be afraid that the universe was evil, but came to realize that it's indifferent, which is more terrifying. Do you believe that to be
yeah,
true? What does that mean for you?
yeah. Sadly, I do. I think there's this idea that we have that there's good and evil, and that evil will be vanquished by good. And sadly, I think if you look at our current political climate, that's not always true. And it feels sometimes that the
Yeah.
universe is. I think it's scary. I was raised in a very religious environment, and one of the things that I used to hear a lot that hell is not fire and brimstone. Hell is being outside of the outside of the eye of God, that God doesn't see you anymore. And I think if you translate that
Mm,
to a humanist perspective, the most terrifying thing is that the universe isn't different, that entropy is real, and that being a human being
yeah.
is really fighting against that. It's beating our fist against the glass, trying to bring meaning to a life, to a world that maybe doesn't inherently have meaning. But I think that's what makes humans special. I think that's what separates us
Yeah.
from every other living organism on Earth. It's not that we're different. Well, like genetically, our closest relatives are chimpanzees, and in many ways, humans and
Hmm.
chimpanzees are just alike. Violence, and strength rules a chimpanzee troop. Violence and strength rules nations. But what separates us from the animals is the idea that a search for beauty and meaning is worth it, that it means something to see a flower and talk about it, to paint it, to write a song about it, to show it to someone. It means something to write a love poem for someone. It means something to write a book. One of my favorite writers is the comic book writer Alan Moore, and he had an interview one time where somebody asked him, like, what would you say to young writers? And he said, I'm paraphrasing, he said, I want young writers to know that they're not just entertainers, that everybody knows
Mm,
somebody who read a book that changed their life, that we're myth makers, and that means something. What we do is important, you know. I used to be very self-deprecating in interviews. I used to be very, oh, I'm not special. What I do isn't a big deal. I can do it. Anybody can do it. I have a very good friend named Jordan Harper who called me one day after listening to an interview. He said, hey, man, stop saying that. What we do is important.
mm,
And if everybody could do it, everybody would do it. You know, we're doing something that means
yeah.
something. Writing means something. Art means something. And so for me, that's the way that we fight against mortality and morality, and the idea of this sort of
Yeah.
arbitrary decision of who's good and who's evil. You know, just because you love someone that somebody else doesn't approve of doesn't make you evil. Just because you write a story that is dark doesn't mean that you're evil. That the idea that
Mm,
that is something that is one definitive definition is ridiculous. And I think art is the sort of bulwark against that.
yeah. What was the book that changed your life?
I have two. One is one that's kind of silly, but I
No, none of it's
I
not silly. Nothing silly. You're stop. Don't say that.
so I read a crime novel written many, many years ago that very few people know about, by a man named Elliot Chase, called Black Wings Has My Angel. And it's a very dark noir novel. I read it when I was like 15. And I was like, wow, this is so dark, but also so beautiful that, this is, it was advertised as Pulp Fiction. It's an old novel written in like the 50s, but it was something about it, even though the characters were tough and hard bitten, there was such a beauty in it. And the other one, the book that really made me realize the power of a writer, was Salem's Lot by Stephen King. And it's
Mm,
in addition to being one of the most terrifying books ever written, I remember reading that book and understanding the way I feel when I read this book is the way I want other people to feel when they read something I wrote. Stephen King has said that
Mm.
writing is telepathy, that we're talking mind to mind. When you read a book, you're reading my thoughts. But more so for me was it showed the power of what a writer does. A writer basically grabs you by the hand and says, come and see. I'm going to show you something. I'm going to show you the worst thing you could imagine, but I'm also going to show you the beauty that exists around it. I'm going to show you people being the worst version of themselves, but I'm also going to show you people being honorable and people sacrificing and people loving, and when I finished that book, I remember thinking, if I ever write a book, I want people to feel like that. I want to grab you by the throat and say, look at this. I'm going to tell you a story. And this is going to be a story like you've never heard before. You're going to have feelings like you've never felt before. And when this book is over, you're not going to be able to forget it. I don't know if I always achieve that high bar, but that's the high bar I'm trying to reach. And Salem's Lot taught me that.
Wow, that's so cool. I will say there are things in King of Ashes that I will never forget. I was at a bagel place the other day, and this is not giving anything away, but I will just say that I happened to notice a guy who works at the bagel place that he didn't have a pinky, and that was triggering to me.
I know the scene you're referencing, and more people talk about that than they do, and you'll know what I'm talking about. More people talk about that than they talk about the kennel. And I thought the kennel was going to be the scene that really ripped people apart. No, it's the pinky scene.
Yeah, the pinky scene. No, the kennel. Yeah, no, I get that, but also I will say it had me asking a lot. What does it mean to be a good person?
Yeah.
And
yeah.
What do you think? Is there an answer? And then of course the question is, does it make you a bad person if you do bad things for a good reason?
I think if you get to a point where you're constantly reminding yourself that the ends justify the means, then you've crossed the Rubicon, right? There's a certain point where if you have to constantly tell yourself this, okay, I'm doing this for the right reason. If you have to constantly remind yourself that, you've already lost the plot. You've already gone beyond the point of no return. I think, there's a scene in King of Ashes where Dante tells, and it's not giving anything away, Dante tells Roman, you keep saying you're doing this for us, but you like it and you're good at it, right? And that's the moment for me where I kind of thought, is he right? Because if he's right, then Roman's not a good person,
Interesting. Right. So if you're doing a bad thing, but for a good reason, but you also happen to like doing that thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You've crossed the line.
Yeah. There's a story. Woof. There's a story, and I don't know the author, but I read it it was a short story in a horror anthology. God, I think it's called The Question is the name of the story. And I don't know the author, so forgive me, but it's basically a story about a man who is, he works for the state as an executioner. He's the guy who flips the switch on the electric chair. And he's talking about his son asked him a question, and now they don't talk anymore. And the question was, the son asked him, do you like it? Do you enjoy it? Right? And the guy says, well, yeah, of course I do. It's my job. And he said his son told him he didn't want to talk to him anymore. And I think that was something in the back of my mind when I was thinking about Roman. If you say, no, I don't like it, it's a necessary thing, it has to be done, I think that says a lot about you as a person. But if you're just like, yeah, of course I enjoy it sometimes. Sometimes people deserve it, blah, 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 blah. I think that's another question you have to ask yourself. And so what does it mean to be a good person? I guess it depends on how much you take pleasure in doing bad things.
Yeah, we'll sit with that for a minute. Well, and similarly, a quote that comes up later is that nothing is impossible. It just depends on how bad you want it. And that can also, so you sort of find the balance between a good person, a bad person, right and wrong, good and evil. Maybe it's as simple as becoming a published author, but is it also, nothing's impossible as in getting rid of that person that you don't like? I think it could be all sorts of things. Is that true for you? Funny. Have you been able to accomplish the things that you want?
I think so. It's funny. people always ask me, like, how do I do it? How do I become a published author? And, there's a nice answer where it was like, so I've always wanted to do this. I've always wanted to be a writer. I wrote my first original story when I was 7 years old because my mom got frustrated with me picking out the potholes in fairy tales. So she challenged me to write my own story. Because I used to be like, why did the Three Little Pigs, why didn't they build all their houses out of bricks in the first place? Why are we even messing around with straw? So that's the good answer, that's the nice answer. But I guess the nothing is impossible answer is spite. I got rejected. My first book got rejected over 60 times, right? And I was told by editors that nobody wanted to read Southern rural noir with black leads, that it doesn't sell, there's no market, it's not viable. And I just was like, I'm going to show you, I could do all things through spite that strengthened me, and it was. I had a chip on my shoulder. I wrote Blacktop Wasteland with a chip. I was very angry. You can read that book. It's an angry book. I was real angry. I had gotten dropped by an agent. I had been, like I said, told nobody wanted to read my book. And so I was like, you know what? F it. I'm going to write the books I want to write, and I'm going to write it the way I want to write it. And, damn the torpedoes, so to speak. And I think there is a darkness there. There's an anger. There's a rage. There's I'm going to show you sort of that comes through. But I think you got to have both of them. You got to want to do it. I've always felt like being a writer is not a thing that I do. It's a thing I am. But also there was I'm going to show you. You're going to regret not publishing this book. I think you got to have both. I think it's the yin and the yang that exists within us. It's funny. There's a movie called The Usual Suspects, right? And there's a scene where a guy is telling a story about Kyle Gustose, and he says that you don't have to be a boss. Basically, you don't have to have more guns or more guys than the other people you're up against. You just have to be willing to do things the other person isn't. I sadly think that's true, but I say sadly because once you go down that road, there's no coming back. So.
Well, I mean, another way to maybe look at it is that other person might not have been willing to go to agent or to publisher 61, right?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah,
and if you're willing to go,
definitely.
For the sake of justifying that poor first pig, maybe that's all he could afford. He could only afford the straw.
That's a good point. I hadn't thought of that. I guess the utilitarian
Bricks are
in me at
expensive.
7. Yeah, man. The utilitarian in me at 7 was like, man, just build a house out of brick. Why are we messing around with sticks? You see, he's a wolf. You're not gonna stop him. And so, it's like, let's.
Now I want to know what other plot holes you found. That's so funny.
Oh man, it was like I remember she would read me Red Riding Hood, and I'm like, her grandmother could not exist. She couldn't survive in a wolf's stomach. There's no air in there, and so my mom, it was like she got frustrated with me. Write your own damn stories. How about that? But what's funny? I wrote a story. About these spacefaring gnomes that crash landed in our backyard when I was 7 years old. And I gave it to my mom. And I remember her telling me, she kept asking me, did you write this all by yourself? Did you do this by yourself? And I'm like, yes, ma'am, I did. And I will say this, the look on her face when she realized I had done it all by myself, I see that look in readers' faces today. And it, it's such an incredible feeling when somebody realizes you created this out of your own mind. And that's the jazz that I get when I write. That's as the kids say, that's the juice. That's the feeling of, I've connected with you and you connected with me, and that I made this up, and I love that. I love seeing that on readers' faces. I love when I sign books and people say that to me, like, how did you come up with this? I don't know. It's such a good feeling.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. Does that story still exist anywhere? Do you have it somewhere?
Yeah.
What's funny?
Gnomes? What's funny? When my mom passed away, we were cleaning the house up. I found it. She had it folded up in her Bible. So I have it. It's at my house. Yeah. It's all
Come on. You got to put it out onto the internet or something. Come on.
No, I keep it. It's a personal memory because I like that I wrote it, but I also like that she was my first reader. So.
Yeah, that's special. And now you can't put it out because not enough people die in that story. So no one would believe it was you.
Nobody dies and the gnomes get back to their planet. It's a happy ending, so nobody's going to read it. This isn't the essay Cosby book.
No. You asked this question in the book, and so I'm turning it back to you. This is Gaze Reading. No one else is going to ask you this question. Have you ever been to a furry party?
So, inadvertently, when I was in, I gotta say this carefully because the people who were there may be listening. I was visiting Europe. I'll just say that. I won't say where. I was visiting Europe, and at the end of my trip, some people that were hosting me was like, "Hey, we're gonna go to this after hours club. Would you like to join us?" And I'm like, "Yeah, of course." So we go to the after hours club, which was in a converted cathedral. You walk in, and there were people there that you very quickly understood that this place was a very open place, if you get my drift. And one of the events there was a party where people were identifying as furries. And my hosts were like, "Do you want to go there? Do you want to just go to the bar?" There were multiple things that you could do in this building. And I was like, "I would just like to have a drink of whiskey so that I will sit down." I mean, no, I don't yuck anybody's yum, but I didn't bring, my Wile E. Coyote outfit, so I'm not going to be able to attend the furry party. And
next time, next time,
guys, when I come back. And they were like, "Are you sure?" I'm like, "Yeah, I'm sure. I'll just sit over here at the bar and have some whiskey." Now I'm gonna tell you the end of that story. It's so funny. After the furry party was over, everybody came out in regular clothes, came over to the bar side, and then they all danced to Uptown Funk by Bruno Mars. I have the recording of it. So that was the end of that story.
That is so funny. I have to say, I don't know what I was expecting when I wrote that question down, but I was like, this just has to be something that like someone told him once, or I don't know, but this was primo. This was perfect.
It was a very interesting end to a wonderful week in Europe.
That is so funny. Oh my God. You're always wearing hats in all your pictures, so I didn't know what you looked like under your hat. And there's something that happens at the beginning of Blacktop Wasteland where, well, yes, I know I've seen a photo since then, but there's a character who talks about how he's worried about cutting off his braids because he's worried about the shape of his head. And my hair has been thinning, and I'm like, my head is not equipped for not being covered. And it started stressing me out.
Well, it's funny. I just wear the hat because I like hats, but I'm lucky. I think I have a good shape for the bald head, and I got the hawk Avery Brooks thing going on for Spencer for Hire. So, but I just like hats. I've always liked hats. My dad liked hats, and I took it from him. So it's actually his hat.
They don't fit my head well. My head is too big. It's a problem.
You know what you got to do? You don't have to worry about it. You just start cutting it close, getting a nice little crew cut going on. You get people used to it. And then one day you just shave it, and then nobody will notice. It was like, "Oh, he's just shaved his head." Okay.
Interesting. It's like literally death by 1,000 cuts.
Yeah.
Oh my God, so funny. This book is so great. I was in it from the very beginning. I couldn't put it down. As I said, it made me want to immediately pick up Blacktop Wasteland, which of course I did. And I'm so excited for everyone to read it.
Oh man, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. It's one of those books where I finished it and I knew how dark it was. I knew how emotional it was. And you don't know what people how they're going to feel, but I've been pleasantly surprised. I've gotten early reviews. People seem to dig it. They like it. I think the thing is, as a writer, you want people to get what you're trying to say. And what I'm trying to say in that book is, like I said, open your heart to people that you love. Don't, that book, if people actually talk to each other in King of Ashes, that book would only be 3 chapters, and so it's the idea that communicate with the people you love, and I'm so glad that people get it and they're connecting with it. They understand, it's, come for the pinky shearing and the kennel scene, but stay for the emotional connection and family drama. So
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I have 2 younger sisters, and it just had me thinking a lot about our dynamic and what we do and don't share, and the trauma that we have experienced together and separately, and what that
yeah.
means and how it connects
Mhm.
us. And yeah, it's all very interesting and thoughtful. Um, well, S.A. Cosby, Sean, books. It's such a joy to have you on Gaze Reading. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh man, thank you for having me. This was so much fun. Thank you guys for having me on, and I really enjoyed myself. Thank you again so much.
Just gay weird time.
Look at your bookshelves behind you.
We live in a very old house, and these are original. And
The fluorescent lights are original.
so I don't know. They do. I have no idea how that got added, but my very sweet husband moved them to my study so I could have them.
Oh my God. I recognize, I think, one.
I'm sure you recognize them. Oh, yes. They're not in particular order yet. There's all my books from the 80s, all my favorite 80s gay writers. And then there's the top shelf for all gay history and AIDS history and stuff.
Oh my God.
I leave all the heterosexual books out downstairs.
They don't get the special treatment. Oh, that's so funny. Richie Jackson, welcome to Gaze Reading.
Thank you for having me. Happy to be here.
Thank you for being my guest gay reader today. It's always been really fun talking to folks about what books bring them joy, especially people who aren't necessarily thought of as a part of the book world, though you have written a book. Even people who have written a book are not always, quote unquote, in the book world. So
you and I both used to be in the theater world. Now we're in the book world, which is much nicer.
I know, we're expats.
I'm so proud of you.
Thank you. I feel seen. Someone I went to college with, to theater school with, she also is now an author. And there was someone else. It's like a good community of people.
There should be a program for us to go to and share.
CHER? SHARE. Richie Jackson, what are you reading? What's on your list?
So I'm reading 2 books that I've chosen for myself, and a third book that our 8-year-old son has assigned to my husband and I.
Tell me more.
The books that I am reading simultaneously are Separate Rooms by Pier Vittorio Tondelli, which is a book from the late 80s and a beautifully written book about gay men. And a new book called It's Not the End of the World by Jonathan Parks Ramage, which just came out, and he is so brilliant and so funny and absolutely twisted. And there it is. He sees the same things I see.
Oh yeah.
Then how he makes sense of it, interprets it, and articulates it is like another stratosphere of a mind that I just marvel at him.
When you say sees the same things,
You see the world falling apart.
Oh,
You see capitalism is evil, but then how he extrapolates from that, I think, is extremely creative and really thrilling to watch.
Yeah, that's really cool. I feel, especially right now, to have people who can creatively interpret I think the technical term is dumpster fire that we're currently a part of.
Exactly. No, I think this book meets the moment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
The other book I just finished was a book I know you spoke to the author, Audition, Katie Kitamura.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that book was stunning.
It's so funny, and I didn't say this to her, but I think I would say this to her. It's going to be one of my favorite books of the year and a book that I hated simultaneously. I loved it so much, but I also can't recommend it to everybody.
It stays with you in really disturbing ways.
Yes.
You know, every time I see my husband blink, I'm like, wait, what does that mean? Katie said that she noticed every little thing her husband did. And I'm like, oh, I should be more attentive.
Yes. The book has it has stuck with me in terms of even waking up in the morning and
true.
how I'm presenting myself throughout
Yeah.
the day. What is this book that your son
My
is making you
8-year-old
read?
son
Mhm.
is in a book group that 2 of his friends and he have started, and they started with Hunger Games. It is the most inappropriate book for an 8-year-old.
Is it?
Oh,
I honestly, I saw the first movie and I have no, other than the people dying and things, I don't really know what an 8-year-old
even
is.
killing of children that my child is reading about. And he said to my husband, I want you to read it too. So now we're reading this book and think, God, we're bad parents. How could we? But it's gotten him to read.
Yeah.
And his friends and he are so competitive. They're now competitively reading. So my son is, I have to read 100 pages today. I was like, okay, have at it. But
That's
I'm a
so
little worried
fun.
because he wants to watch the movie now.
I feel like I was reading Lord of the Flies in school when I was not 8, but I was young. I feel 6th or 7th grade.
Yeah, I don't really. He has a very clear, like, he knows what's real and what's not real, and
Yeah.
it's not scaring him because he knows it's not real. But I do think, like, if he's not playing a video game, then because he's not allowed. You don't allow him to watch TV or play video games, so I can't really start restricting what he. Then we're those gay parents, and we
Right.
can't be those gay parents.
Oh my God. Is this a new thing for him, reading?
Oh, reading. He has to read for school. He has
Mhm.
homework to read, but he's always, unless he loves the book, it's always a bit of a chore for him to read. And then he
But
starts.
that's true for everyone. I totally relate to that so deeply. And I think
No, you weren't a reader
Right.
until you decided to start a podcast about. Talk
be
about
fair-
backing into it. Yeah.
to be fair, the reading came first and then the podcast came. I would be a little crazy.
I want to see proof of that. Actually, if you thought to have a cooking podcast.
It's funny that you say that because I have a knack for taking like leftovers and turning them into something else.
Oh my God, that's a cookbook.
I know. And I was like, this
do a
could be a
whole-
really fun.
You could do a whole thing.
I know. I don't have the patience for that. You have to take nice pictures. And the reality is the leftovers are going to be different every time.
Also, I don't think you have to take nice pictures because leftovers will never look good.
No, those will no, for sure. But the ingredients are never the same. So like I can't recreate the same thing again. We really can't make a recipe. That's where
It's a really fun idea.
thank you. But no, once I was like, wait, the whole point is that you don't have a recipe.
Right.
So that sort of put the kibosh on that idea that I had.
And then you turn to a book podcast.
Exactly. What's the next best thing?
It's interesting to me that you chose the word gay in your age and the time, because I would choose that word, but it's not queers are reading.
It's funny that you say that because I have thought about adding an asterisk to the artwork and to some of the way I'm talking about it, but I grew up at a time where gay was the general term.
Yeah. How old are you? Can I ask?
I'm 37.
Okay. I'm going to be 60.
Oh, you look great.
I assume you have a filter or something. This makes it look better, right?
You have good lighting.
Yeah.
It's okay. And so, yeah, gay was a general term for me. And at the time, it was a thing that makes sense. But now, of course, that I'm doing this guest gay reader series and I talk to all sorts of people who identify in all sorts of ways.
Interesting.
That's where I'm like, okay, maybe I need to amend so that I don't offend. Yeah, it can be tricky, right? The world that we're in.
It is a tricky world. It is not unlike working in the theater where you do want to preserve something you love even when it becomes your work, because sometimes that's a challenge, right?
Absolutely. And yet I obviously have a compulsion to find something that I love, and it can't just be a hobby. I need to
You need to monetize.
monetize something we're still working on. But yeah, create something beyond a casual hobby. Like even working in theater, when I was a kid, I loved putting on plays, and I couldn't just leave it at that. I couldn't then go be a scientist. That just wasn't how I worked.
If you think about what you're doing, creating community, which is exactly what the world needs right now, and books create empathy, which is exactly what the world needs right now. So I think you're providing a really important service to
Oh,
people.
thank you. I appreciate that. And I have to say, when I was having my existential crisis, when theater was being less kind, I really stripped away what it was about it that brings me joy. And I think storytelling and empathy building and community building, those are really the tent poles for
Yeah,
me.
that's everything.
Sure. For the things that you're passionate about. I'm sure that's true for the guys who work the construction site too, but that's not for me.
Ways at the construction.
Listen, I have a brand here. It could be Gays Cooking, Gays Constructing.
Ways construction site might want to be your porn.
Yes, my
brand.
OnlyFans.
Yes.
Short shorts and orange vests.
Belt. Yes, I see it.
Have you always been a reader?
Yes, except when I had to read when I was in grade school, I couldn't read. I had really struggled with reading when I was in the 3rd grade, to the point where I was taken out of my class for special help. And I never read without a ruler, because I had to put something under every line for fear that the words coming at me were just distracting me.
Yeah.
But then I started to just read, and really basically, I think, have educated myself from books, and certainly educated myself how to be gay, how to live a gay life, from reading Andrew Holleran and Edmund White and Felice Picano and Christopher Bram, all these people. When I moved to New York in 1983, I immersed myself in gay male writers because nobody teaches you how to be gay. Nobody raises you gay, which is why I wrote my book, Gay Like Me, to provide some blueprint. But these incredible writers helped me understand the world I joined.
Yeah. Are there some, I don't know, maybe initial memories that you have that were imprinted on you from reading some of those early on?
Certainly Best Little Boy in the World, which is this book about how gay men tend to be always wanting to be perfect and always having to get everything right so as not to be found out. Like, it was basically, I wasn't that closeted person, but there was this notion that if you just are the A-type, A personality, people won't realize what you're hiding. And I remember things like, I had never been to a gay bar, but the character in the book took off their glasses before they went to a gay bar because glasses weren't attractive. He couldn't see any guy in the bar, but at least he looked more attractive. Andrew Holleran wrote the best gay novel, in my opinion, Dancer from the Dance.
This has come up a few times. I have not read it yet, but lots of people have told me I need to.
It is the most beautiful book. And Larry Kramer called Andrew Holleran our Hemingway, meaning that the prose was so beautiful. And what that did for me, was it elevated my idea of what it was to be gay. Even in the stories of going to Fire Island and having lots of sex, or staying out all night at clubs, all of the culture of the gay community, he wrote about in such beautiful words that it gave me respect for our community. And to this day, I can recite passages from it. And it's one of the things he wrote that I sent to my husband when we were courting, was about how the person you fall in love with is the magic bearer, the magician, the one who brings all this to us. And it's the most beautiful image of what the person you fall in love with is. And that stuck with me.
That's really beautiful. And it's interesting, I think, just the need for gay, queer, LGBTQ plus people to see that example of, what did you say, elevated what it means to be gay. And I think when you do a simple Google search of queer people in history, to really see the gay people that have had impact on the world, right? Not even just a small community, but on the world, is, I think, empowering and important, and something that I don't think we really think about. And
I think it's apt. This is why I think it's crucial that gay people read gay books, because otherwise you are trying to fit yourself into a world that you do not belong in. And I am always reading a gay book or an LGBTQ book. Even when I read if I go into the other world and read about
Audition.
those crazy heterosexuals confound me. Let me just say, when I read them, I can't make sense of them. But I'm always reading a LGBTQ book simultaneously because I'm not going to spend my life fitting myself into someone else's story and trying to blur my eyes to like, maybe I can see myself there. It's just, that is not good for your gay self-esteem.
Yeah, no, that's a really interesting point. And I think it's funny, people will ask me a lot, how come I don't only talk to gay authors? And I think part of it is the flip side of gay people should be and need to be reading gay books, but gay people don't only read gay books. And in addition, because of who I am, bring a different perspective to a quote unquote straight book.
Right.
An interesting example is I interviewed Nathan Hill for his book Wellness, which I loved, but it is about a 30-year heterosexual relationship, but I was looking at it through a gay lens. And in fact, I had a handful of queer people reach out to me and say, I loved the book when I read it. And after listening to the conversation with Nathan from your perspective, it just elevated it to a way that I didn't even imagine. And so that was important to me as well, because again, we don't just read gay books. What I also found very interesting about what you said brings me to why I don't only ask my guest gay readers to tell me about books that they're reading. Whenever I tell someone to prep for this conversation, I say it could be IKEA instructions, it could be the back of a cereal box, it could be a novel.
I can't make sense. I can make sense of Audition. I can't make sense of IKEA instructions.
Of course, the joke about that is that it's only pictures.
Yeah.
Right. No, of course. But my point is because we're always reading something, right? And we're always receiving that information and whatever that means to us. And I remember being a young gay person coming up at a time where I had the internet and doing my Googling, which was my due diligence as to your reading Andrew Holleran. And I remember some search talking about what gay sex can be. And in addition to the things that I think people think of when they think of sex, it also just talked about intimacy and that massages and kissing and what we now know as frottage, all sorts of things can be sex beyond intercourse. And I think for me, as a young person, reading that was an unlock, saying, "Oh, there can be a lot of things, and it means so much."
My book is entirely a letter to my gay son, and one of the things I said is, I want you to have as much sex as you can when you're young, but you won't know where in the journey the person you're having sex with is, and sex is a tightrope. So you have to protect your heart while also trying to be as vulnerable as possible. And I also said in the book, and I say to my son, you have to protect the heart of the other person, because they might be closeted, they might have been abused, they might have been bullied. You don't know. So take care with the people that you have sex with.
Yeah. How did Gay Like Me come to be? Was that sort of the impetus?
The impetus was our older son was 14 when he told my husband and I he was gay, and I was elated. I was hoping, my greatest wish was for him to be gay. And then he said, "Daddy, being gay is not a big deal. My generation doesn't think it's a big deal." And I thought, oh no, being gay is a really big deal. And I wanted to think about all the things I needed to share with him about what it means to be a gay man. And as I was writing that, Donald Trump was elected. And I had to warn him about how to stay safe as an LGBTQ person in America. He was about to go to college. He was ready for college. He was not ready to be a gay man in America. And I moved to New York City in 1983, right at the beginning of the AIDS epidemic. So I've seen 50 years of our history.
Yeah. And
because I'm going to be 60. So I came here in 83 and when I was 17. So I've lived through a lot of what we've been through.
Yeah.
And I left the AIDS war having a devotion and love for our community, a distrust for our government, and weariness for straight people. And I wanted to impart everything being gay is a gift. It is an absolute gift as long as you take advantage of the gift. And that's what my message to him in the book was.
Interesting. I know. I want to say, tell me more about that, but that's what the book is for. We'll read it. Do we know anything about your next book? You're working on it?
I'm working on it, ready to say what it
Nope,
is.
that's okay.
I'm 3/4 through, and
Fantastic.
I'm excited to share it.
You'll be back to talk about that book. I can't wait.
And I'll see you in Palm Springs.
See you in Palm Springs. Richie Jackson, thank you so much for being here.
Really enjoyed it.
Everyone check out Gay Like Me. It just came out a few years ago.
Yes.
Right?
And, yeah, it is available.
Right. It's
And
everywhere. Wherever you get your books.
I'm very proud to have, I'm very honored to have been able to tell the story.
I love that. Sean, Books, Richie, thank you so much for being here. Everyone, thank you. Have a wonderful rest of your day. And I will see you next week. Bye.